Suhasini, and it's a real pleasure listening to all the talks. And I would like to especially congratulate Dr. Ajay Arora. He gave the initial part of his talk, I would say, is the Mool Mantra of medical practice. That's what we should do. And that gives a long way, not only managing diabetic macular edema, but in our overall medical practice. And I'll just go from where he spoke about that 40% of diabetic, especially those who have diabetic macular edema, they have systemic factors. And what I thought in this next 12 minutes, I'll be covering what influence these systemic factors have on DME and whether any change in management strategy is needed. So they can have variety of things. You can have glycemic control, BP control, sleep apnea, renal disease. So these diabetics who come to us with diabetic macular edema may have multiple other things. And all of them have some bearing as far as the management of DME is concerned. So let's start with the glycemic control, which is the most common. And if you look at the effect on anti-VEGF, we have the evidence from majority of the trials. And if you look at the older trials, they all said that there is no effect of HbA1c on the treatment response after anti-VEGF. But if you see the recent trials, the trials with aflibercept, the Vivid Vista, Protocol T, they did had HbA1c as a variable where they found that the response of anti-VEGF was dependent to some level to HbA1c. So now the newer trials are finding this thing that a poor control of diabetes in terms of a poor HbA1c, you may witness a less response of anti-VEGF. Which anti-diabetic is best in cases of DME? Again, there is no, all are good. There is no extra benefit of one agent over another. But you must all realize that whenever there is a rapid reduction of HbA1c or a good glycemic control, there is worsening of retinopathy. So when you get that, whenever there is an initiation of insulin therapy in type 1, or whenever there is a switch from oral hypoglycemic to insulin, which we see more often in our clinic. So the important message is if a patient is coming with a worsening of retinopathy, do ask whether there is a switch of glycemic to insulin. How many of them will develop it? So the evidence today suggests that in type 1, because they are young, only 13% will develop some worsening, whereas in type 2, all of them will have some form of worsening of retinopathy. They have 3 times more risk of even vision loss. And what happens in long term? So we know from DCCT and UKPDS that over longer times, how long? Probably about 5 to 6 years. It reduces the progression of diabetic retinopathy. So definitely a good glycemic control is important, understanding these initial caveats. There is this term which is often used whenever we talk of glycemic control and diabetic retinopathy, a metabolic memory and legacy effect. So this was basically the two population-based studies, the DCCT for type 1 and UKPDS for type 2. And they had two arms, both the studies. They had a conventional treatment and an intensive treatment. And study got over and everybody became as a routine care. They were again followed later on after 10 years. The DCCT, they called it as a EDIC study, and UKPDS, it was 10 years follow-up study. And what they found that the group who had initially, when they were diagnosed as diabetes and when they were in the initial phase of the trial, if they were on intensive treatment, it even gave protection for retinopathy later on. Both in type 1, where DCCT called it as metabolic memory, and in type 2, UKPDS called it as a legacy effect. And more recently, now we know that how this is mediated. Why it is important? Because if we can really find out the mechanism why this memory is there, probably we can prevent diabetic retinopathy. And that is something which people are now working on. Another thing on glycemic control, take a history on glitazones. Uh, for in between probably about 3-4 years back, glitazones were banned in India. But thanks to Dr. V. Mohan, who really showed that it is important, it is one of the important things, and those side effects are not there in India, it has again been approved. And we do get many of the patients who have combinations, glitazones with other oral hypoglycemic agents. And if a person is on thiazolidinediones or glitazones, he has more risk of diabetic macular edema. So they themselves can cause macular edema in type 2 diabetes, especially in those patients who are also on insulin. So what I spoke about is more of efficacy in DME. If you are treating DME, why you need to control and what things to look for. Now let's look into safety. That's what the point is, whether at what level we should inject. In UK, they follow HbA1c and they use a value of less than 8.5. These patients, they go ahead injecting anti-VEGFs. In India, we stick on to what the AIOS guidelines are there for cataract surgery. That means less than 200 RBS. Definitely, as we have seen, it's important to look at HbA1c as a management point of view for DME. There is definitely an advantage, but there are also some problems of using HbA1c as a cutoff for injections, because what we do routinely is that if your RBS is high, we cancel it. But if HbA1c, we know many a times HbA1c would, in our population is always 9 or 10. So we'll never give the injection and we need to again call them. And if we give based on, we have the value of HbA1c and we give the injection based on the RBS, that's a medical legal problem. So that's a problem, but it's good always to have HbA1c values. Coming to the next scenario, that is DME in hypertensives. I'll cover some of the points. Many times it's difficult to differentiate whether it is hypertensive retinopathy or diabetic retinopathy. If you look at moderate non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy and hypertensive changes, many a time they look quite alike. However, there are some differences which you should look for. If you get these cluster of microaneurysms, especially in the macular area, it's more towards retinopathy. Intraretinal hemorrhage, blot shaped, is more towards diabetic retinopathy, whereas if you have these flame-shaped hemorrhages, that is more towards hypertensive retinopathy. You get more arteriolar changes in hypertension and you get more venular changes in diabetic retinopathy. And in hypertension, sometimes you get these multiple cotton wool spots, which are maybe peripapillary, again, more towards hypertension. So if you see these signs on your clinical examination, try to look for that you are dealing with both type or mixed type of retinopathy, or it is predominantly hypertensive, or it is diabetic. Is the morphology in hypertension a bit different as far as OCT is concerned? And there are studies which have shown that it is inversely associated with the macular thickness, mostly the macular subfields. Again, not more for retinal, but there are again more evidence that choroidal thickness is inversely related to hypertension. Higher the BP, there is thinner choroid. And in our own study at Shankar Nethralaya, where we tried looking at NSD, and one of the things which I used to believe, that I was seeing that people who have anemia, they were having NSD more. But in our study, when we did a proper case control, we actually found that higher systolic and diastolic pressure are independent risk factors for neurosensory detachment in DME. What influence does BP have, or say hypertension has, on diabetic macular edema? So this is an important finding, that sometimes you may get spontaneous variation in central macular thickness, especially when that is related to higher pulse pressure. So if a person you are seeing on a month visit, I'm not talking about treatment effect, but spontaneous, if you are seeing some variation, you're seeing that is more. And many times we just say that he improved by itself. Try to look for pulse pressure and the other cardiac diseases along with it. Not for DME, but it has got a beneficial effect as far as the new onset diabetic retinopathy is concerned. It reduces the incidence and also reduces the progression of retinopathy. And BP control doesn't have the metabolic memory. What we spoke about, what was there in HbA1c, the same study, they didn't find that BP control had any effect. What would be the response to treatment of anti-VEGF? Is there any effect of BP? There are again not very clear evidences, but there are evidence that a poorly controlled blood pressure may have an acute impact on the need of injections. There are indirect evidence like the MEAD study, which is a study of Ozurdex. They found that the people who had absence of hypertension, they had better improvement of BCVA. That's a subgroup analysis. Again, they also found, they tried looking at the more the number of antihypertensive medications, better was the improvement in the central retinal thickness. So there are some indirect evidences that the BP or the hypertension may have a role as far as response to treatment of anti-VEGFs are concerned. So now again, let's talk about safety, when to inject. So there is an entity called as hypertensive urgency. That is a BP which is greater than 180 by 110 to 180 by 120. And without any sign of an end organ damage. That's called as a hypertensive urgency. And what is important that within 4 years, 2% of them die, the mortality in hypertensive urgency. There are studies which have shown that 20 to 30% of our patients, they experience hypertensive urgency during the injection procedure. And again, they tried looking at, and as I'm again remembering the talk of Dr. Ajay, where he said the patient experience is so important. So they found that discomfort of the last injection and age were associated with this hypertensive urgency. So make it sure that all your injections are a pleasant experience for your patient. Now, whether there is a need for monitoring during injection is questionable, but definitely it is good idea to monitor the blood pressure before giving your intravitreal injections. Another set of systemic comorbidity DME can present is with renal problems. They have nephropathy along with it, both go together. So is macular edema different in these? Clinically, though we don't have much literature, but we do know that we have seen they have more ischemic maculopathy, they may have massive exudations, and you have these more peripapillary like in hypertension. Even in those with renal disease, you have more peripapillary cotton wool spots. OCT, again, they have neurosensory detachment. The top picture, you can see there is a neurosensory detachment with a compact inner layers, or you have diffuse edema along with neurosensory detachment. So this is a morphology you see, you should suspect of nephropathy also. Is it safe to use intravitreal anti-VEGF in patients with renal problems? So this was in 2019, I think November, a guideline which came out from nephrology people, and their association, they came out with that if during a patient is on an anti-VEGF injection and during his follow-up, if there is an increase in creatinine and blood urea nitrogen or increased BP, that is the time you should think. So it's important to ask him how your renal parameters are. So if your renal parameters are not controlled, they actually told to switch to a safer, which they in that study told ranibizumab. But again, this is controversial, but it's a good idea to look at if the renal parameters are not very much controlled, skip a month of that month of injection, call them again. Once they are controlled, go ahead with giving your intravitreal injection. How reliable are the OCT thickness value? Because many of our injections are based on central subfield thickness. How reliable they are in presence of retinopathy? So the chronic kidney disease, they have various stages. The initial stage of the diseases, it is like other DME. In the stage 4, stage 5 CKD, that's the stage when they need dialysis, they need many times renal transplants, renal failure. There is thinning of inner layers. So that you should keep in mind. Another thing, we know that that there is a diurnal variation, about 10 to 11% is a diurnal variation in the central retinal thickness. And these are the patients who have anyway fluid everywhere. They have pedal edema, they have, so their diurnal variations is also more. So the routine thing which we think that 10% reduction or more than 11% is significant, here that doesn't apply. What is the effect of dialysis in DME? Very varied, but one uniformly all evidences suggest that it affects more of a choroidal compartment rather than retinal compartment. And some show that after dialysis, the retinal thickness reduces. Some say it doesn't have any effect. However, uniformly, everybody says if it's the first dialysis and a patient has macular edema, definitely the reduction of the central retinal thickness happens. And anyway, whenever you are planning a patient who is on dialysis and you're planning injection, better to plan the dialysis after intravitreal injection, so that even if some metabolite toxic agents are in the blood, that gets also removed. What is the effect of transplant, the renal transplant on macular edema? So this was one of our series which we published in IGO, a 12-year follow-up. And we did find that after renal transplant in those who have end-stage renal disease, 68% of the cases the retinopathy stabilized or improved, and 16% of them had DME. So definitely it has got a effect as far as the DME management is concerned. Just a word of cautious, there is another drug like the glitazones, which can cause reversible macular edema, fingolimod. And post-renal transplant, people used to use it, but now it is more used for multiple sclerosis. More so now we are also seeing, even in India, combined renal and pancreas transplantation. And this is like the condition where patient becomes non-diabetic, and it's like sudden reduction of blood sugar. So their retinopathy actually worsens initially. Which test is good for looking at when you look at your diabetic retinopathy and renal profile? So this is the recent work which I did with MV Diabetes, and this got published in BMJ last month. And we tried looking at a huge series, nearly 25,000 diabetics who had nephropathy with the follow-up data. And what we found that for PDR, it's good to look for eGFR, estimated GFR, which uses age and serum creatinine. And for diabetic macular edema, it's better to look at the urine albumin and creatinine ratio, the microalbuminuria and albumin. Coming to another systemic factor, the cardiovascular events or CVA. So diabetes as such, actually both American Diabetic Association and American Heart Association, they consider diabetes as a coronary heart disease equivalent. So it is an important risk factor. And we also know that diabetic retinopathy is a manifestation of a more generalized micro and macrovascular degeneration. And it is associated with a higher cardiovascular risk, and type 2 diabetes with retinopathy are at higher risk for even the small vessels in the brain getting involved. So they have more risk of cardiovascular events as compared to a non-diabetic. There are also evidence that those who have DME, they have more chances of hospitalization, more chances of stroke and myocardial infarct. And even if a person doesn't have retinopathy, he just had a stroke or a myocardial infarction, post-ischemic heart disease or heart failure, 10% of even these non-diabetic may have lesions which are similar to diabetic retinopathy. They may have microhemorrhages, hot and wool spots. So that's something which you should again remember. When to avoid anti-VEGF? So history of recent stroke or recent MI. What is recent? So that has changed. At one time we used to take 6 months, but today it is 3 months. And if a patient has experienced, many times patient gets some treatment outside and he again comes back to you, always check whether his systemic cardiovascular status was fine. And if a patient has experienced the event, it's important to tell him about it, that it increases the incidence of cardiovascular event. And next 3 months he should not take, because you have refused, he will go to somewhere else and get an injection done. Another risk factor more in our Indian population is anemia, and how that can play a role as far as DME is concerned. So in our SN Dreams population-based study, we did found that anemia is an independent risk factor for diabetic retinopathy. And we know anemia means there is ischemia. Ischemia, again, you are looking at VEGF, more of erythropoietin, and they have more chance of edema, theoretically. For treating these anemia, especially in diabetics and those who have nephropathy, erythropoietin is used. And erythropoietin is something which is a double-edged weapon. So it actually improves macular edema. So if a person is on erythropoietin and there is macular edema, don't inject. It can reduce by itself, but it worsens the stage of retinopathy. You will see a patient with moderate NPDR and within 3-4 months, he'll become PDR. So keep that in mind, that it worsens the retinopathy, but it improves macular edema. Iron supplements, again, one of the treatment which is used in DME. There is no evidence in anemia. There is no evidence in diabetic retinopathy, but in a CAT trial, that's for AMD, they did find that those who had oral iron supplement subgroup analysis, they had more retinal and subretinal hemorrhages in a dose-dependent manner. So we really don't know whether that will be true in diabetic retinopathy, but that's something, some evidence is there in AMD. Coming to lipids, serum lipids, is the OCT different and is the treatment different if you have dyslipidemia? So these are the evidences which are related to OCT features and the lipids, serum lipids. So a person who has diabetes with no diabetic retinopathy, LDL cholesterol seems to be closely related to central subfield thickness and even subcentral volume. There are evidence that increased total cholesterol is associated with a higher total macular volume and not central subfield thickness. That means if you subtract the central subfield thickness from total macular volume, you get what is the non-center involving. So probably those cases where non-center involving cholesterol may play a role. And those with center involving diabetic macular edema, they didn't find any significant relationship between the thickness and the serum lipids. So again, this is just a hypothesis that lipid lowering drugs may have a role in non-center involving. However, there are very elegant work done by our colleagues from PGI Chandigarh, Dr. Amod Gupta, who did show that those who have these exudation, there is a role for statins and they act as an adjuvant. They reduce the chance of subfoveal migration, especially in CSME. Again, LDL cholesterol and triglycerides, they are independently associated with the hard exudate area. And patients with higher triglycerides are more likely to have hard exudates in the central macular area. Coming to another comorbidity is infection. Many times they have UTI or a diabetic foot. Is there any role? So we do know that because of they have immune dysfunction, hyperglycemic environment, you should definitely avoid intravitreal injection in presence of active infection. Now, he has already taken his antibiotics, surgeon has given clearance, it is healing. He has a foot ulcer, non-healing foot ulcer. That also increases the risk of infection, but you can go ahead with injection in these cases. But again, tell the caregiver and the patient to do the foot dressing before doing the eye dressing or instilling the drops. So you can do the foot dressing, do a sanitization, and then put the drops. We are now seeing more of these patients on keto diet and on bariatric procedures. What effect that has on DME? It's exactly like a tight control of diabetes. So they have sudden reduction of sugars, and they again can have worsening of retinopathy. Sleep apnea is more recently, people have tried looking at, it has been attributed as an independent risk factor for diabetic macular edema. And they have found that refractory DME, those who are not responding to any of them, try to look for this obstructive sleep apnea by doing the sleep studies. So to conclude, DME management is a forte of ophthalmologists. However, many a times you need to work with your diabetologist and nephrologist, try to look for these comorbid conditions, which gives you two things: how safe it is to inject in these cases, and also it has got definitely a bearing on the outcome of diabetic macular edema. Thank you very much.